Hi, everyone, and welcome to Build, Train, Retain, How Small HR Teams Drive Big Results with L&D. I'm Cheyenne Robinson, your moderator for today's session. If you've ever felt like you're stuck in HR admin mode, but want to be seen as a strategic leader, this session is for you. Welcome. If you can hear me loud and clear, say hey in the chat and tell us your name and where you're tuning in from. Great. So I'm here in Texas. Matthew is in the UK, so you'll get to hear his fun British accent here in a moment. And then we have our special guest, Anne, in the Chicago area.
Hi, everybody.
We've got folks from all over Uruguay, Virginia, Illinois. Amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. So we have a few housekeeping notes. Use the chat to share your thoughts and ask questions throughout. I'll be monitoring it live. If you miss anything, don't worry. The replay will be up immediately afterwards on YouTube, LinkedIn, and sent out to those that registered on StreamYard. Before we dive in, everyone here live has the chance to win 5 seats into our leadership program. Just from being here live. You can enter now at leadership.com/figlearning or leadership.figlearning.com/enter-to win. So I just dropped that into the chat for you so that you can go ahead and register. And I'll remind you later as well about the giveaway so that you can get your organization entered to win. Now, I'd love to introduce our speakers. So we have with us today 2 very special guests. I'm excited to tell you more about them. So Ann Mitchell is the Chief HR Human Resource Officer at Montway Auto Transport with over 20 years of experience in HR strategy and employee development. Ann's known for creating inclusive, high-performance cultures that align HR with business outcomes. Welcome, Ann.
Hey, everyone. Thank you.
Matthew Wilkinson is the Chief Learning Officer at FIG. He's led L&D strategy at global companies and now helps small and mid-sized teams drive results through smarter and more human-centered learning programs. We're really keeping it tight today on time, just 30 minutes. We'll save some time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat as we go along. And let's start with you. When you joined Montway, what were some early signs that told you learning and development needed to be a bigger priority?
Yeah, so I joined the organization in late 2022, Cheyenne. And at that time, Montway was going from a very successful startup organization, really trying to get to an organization that's built for long-term sustainable growth. So there was lots of change going on within the organization, right? And this created angst kind of across all levels. But as part of those changes, as we were implementing new things, it became apparent that our managers, coming from that startup, really high-paced environment, right, didn't have a lot of opportunity for growth and development. So there was a need for us to think about how do we upskill them with things like interviewing, right, giving feedback, setting goals for their teams. So that was the first thing. The second thing came from our engagement survey. So when I started, our whole HR team had 6 months of tenure or less as we were building this new organization. So we didn't really have an idea of where do we go? How do we, what should we focus on, right, in terms of priorities? So we implemented an engagement survey in early 2023. And the results from that engagement survey were very loud and clear. Employees, across all levels really wanted to get more opportunity for professional development and career growth. So it was really those 2 things that led us to figure out hey, we got to do something. There's a problem we need to solve.
Thanks, Ann. That really helps paint such a clear picture as to why it mattered to act quickly. And now let's zoom out a bit. Matthew, you've led L&D at large organizations, but what are some of the lessons that from big company learning strategies that translate surprisingly well for small HR teams?
Thank you, Shane. So I think there's one that translates for both sizes of organizations, and that's ensuring that any learning and development is anchored with the business goals. As we know, sometimes it's pretty tough to get training funded within organizations. But when you are making sure that what you're planning to do is solving a problem for the organization, it's much more likely to get the go-ahead from executives. I think it's really important also to think not just what training do we need as your first question, but rather what problem are we trying to solve? That's always the starting point, whether you're a massive international company or whether you're a startup company as well. So I think that's the first thing. I also think there's something in this around measurement, because it's not just about attendance. It's not just about who attends training, but what impact does that training have? So there are always through pulse surveys, through your maybe you have an NPS, anything like that, to understand what the impact is of what training you're exploring with the people in your team or within your organization as well. So don't just track those numbers, those bums on seats. I suppose the last thing is there are some other ways where, particularly if you're in a small organization, you don't always have to go and spend lots of money on training. What about peer learning within the company? That can be done very easily and have a massive impact, where you have people in a company who are experts in a particular field. Use them. Facilitate open conversations, fireside chats with other people within the company as well. And it also helps those people who are delivering that training to develop themselves at the same time for no added cost. So I think those are some ways that small companies can inject training very successfully into their organization.
Yeah, I love what you said there, especially about the peer learning. Big ideas don't always need big budgets, so that's important to keep in mind for those small teams. And speaking of doing more with less, your team didn't hire a big L&D department, but you've seen big results. What were some of the first steps you took to make learning more strategic and more scalable across the company?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, our team is really small. So given, the workload at the time, the budgetary restrictions, it was clear we weren't able to either put in, hire L&D experts and have them be part of the HR team. And then given the current level of workload within our small team, we weren't able to take on the L&D function as well. So we really need to figure out, okay, how do we go about this? So the first thing we did was make sure that our efforts were aligning with the overall business needs. So we had to review the organizational goals, right? Understand the business strategy. And then after we understood kind of from the business standpoint, where was the business heading, we needed then to also understand the development needs in a little more detail. So we had that initial engagement survey that said, hey, I want more of this, but we didn't have the granular information to really understand, okay, well, what are people looking for and what are the needs? So we implemented a much more granular survey specifically focused on learning and development. So we assessed all levels, so from individual contributor up through senior leader, and then across all of our employees in the United States. And then we also have employees in Bulgaria. So we assessed all of those team members and asked them things like, what are the areas of interest? Where do you want to grow and develop? Are there certain topics that are of interest to you? We asked those same questions of managers. And then we also asked managers, hey, as you look at your team, are there areas of gap in terms of skill sets within your team where we can upskill your team members for better results as well? So between those things, it became very clear that we needed a solution, right? We knew that going in, but we didn't know, what does that look like? So when we took all of those data points together, it became clear that we needed an LMS or a learning management system, right? So something that would help us throughout the entire employee life cycle. So starting with attracting top talent, that was a priority, right? We also wanted to be able to, get our new hires up to board or up to productivity quicker, right? So what system can help us with that? How do we get easily accessible courses to partner with our development plans? So again, getting our existing team members developed as they wanted from that engagement survey. And then also, again, looking at our leaders, how do we grow and develop the leaders? So all of this data and feedback ultimately led us to realize we needed to implement an LMS that would really align with, our strategy and our needs as an organization.
Absolutely. That's such a helpful, those are such helpful examples. Now, Matthew, I'm curious, what's one common mistake that small HR teams make when rolling out training, and how can they avoid it?
Well, unfortunately, there's probably more than one, but maybe I can have two, if that's all right. So the first one is around perfectionism. I think maybe because we've got a lot on our plate within smaller teams, sometimes we want to get it absolutely perfect, but as we know, there's no such thing. It doesn't exist. So one of the things I think is really helpful is to get it out there, test it, maybe with a smaller group of people, get their feedback, iterate, and then go again. And you can obviously, if you're needing to share that across the rest of the organization, these small wins can really help sell that. So I think perfectionism doesn't do us any good. The second thing is around what happens after training. Again, we're so busy trying to organize whatever the solution is, whatever the workshop is, we don't always spend enough time focusing on what happens after the workshop or the piece of training. And again, as we know, that's the essential part. That's where it really matters, because the research shows that individuals and learners will forget 70% of what they've learned within a week. And that's hugely costly. So how can we, and how can teams ensure that's not going to be 70%? And I think there are ways such as engaging with the learner's manager, for example, organizing some of the peer learning that I mentioned in my last answer, action learning sets, enabling people to really come back and identify what's worked well for them, maybe what hasn't worked so well for them, and what further support they need. And then what I found, rather than then having to go and buy more expensive training, you get lots of great resource from around the company sharing their knowledge, sharing when things aren't going well, and getting coaching from other members of the team as well. Really, really helpful. Breaks down silos, saves you loads of money, but you need to think and need to put that focus on after the training as you're designing, or if you're contracting with an external company as well, because that's where the learning matters after the training.
Thanks for that, Matthew. And I'm sure a lot of the small HR leaders here probably really hit home when you mentioned the perfectionism of, for not only with L&D, but with other things. So I'm really glad that you touched on that. And I'd love to know, for those that are here, is that something that you struggle with across your department? And just say yes in the chat. Let us know if that's something that you struggle with too. Now, before we move forward, I did want to share a really great time to share our giveaway if you haven't entered yet. Again, you've got 5 free seats that you can win into our leadership program. This is going to be for new managers, which is the group that needs the most help, at least when you're starting to roll out a leadership program. So it's perfect if you want to apply what you're learning with your team. And if you'll just visit the website shown or just scan the QR code, you can enter to win. So now let's talk about impact. So Anne, I'd love to know more about how has investing in leadership development changed how HR is seen inside your company?
Yeah, so the key to being able to, which really, what changed how we were viewed in the organization really was being able to show the return on investment in learning and development, right? So any HR initiative, whether it's learning and development, implementing a new compensation structure, benefit plans, whatever it may be, it goes back to aligning with the overall company goals and strategy, right? You've got to have that alignment to show the ROI. So again, when I went through this initially, I did not have any budget. There was nothing in my budget for learning and development. And there's no way I would have been able to seek or get approval when I went to ask the CFO and CEO if I didn't say, hey, here's what I want and here's what I believe the ROI to be. And I think it's important to understand that the ROI financially is a big part of it, but there's way more to the ROI than just the cost, right? And the benefit of that in large is our employees. So when you think about our culture and our employee experience, this has been vastly impacted by learning and development. So when I mentioned that engagement survey that we participated in, this is the third year in a row we've been certified as a great place to work. And I believe a large attribute of that certification and the engagement levels within our company ties back to leadership development. And then you think about investing in our leaders, right? So we're now investing in our leaders, building their skill sets. We're helping to push collaboration, innovation within the organization, which gets back to when I talked about joining the organization, the focus was really on building a long-term organization capable of sustainable growth, right? We have to have innovation. We have to have collaboration in order to do that. So as the managers become more confident in their skill sets, it then translates down to their team, right? Now the manager has better leadership skills. They're able to have better coaching conversations, right? They can develop and support their teams. So now we've got this whole thing, vibe going on in the company of, right, it's trickling down, energy's improving, engagement's improving. So that helped impact how HR is seen within the organization. But I think the last thing I'll just share that's also important when you think about ROI is how we're perceived externally, right? So the job market is exceedingly competitive. Like everybody knows that right now, and it's probably not going to change anytime soon. So for our talent acquisition team, they're able to go out and talk about Montway's commitment to employee development. And this in turn helps to give us the competitive edge in the labor market. So, Montway again is a small company, but this allows us to compete against the larger organizations out there. So those are really the three to four things that helped change how HR is viewed as in the organization as really driving value.
That's such a powerful shift. And before we close out and head to the Q&A, we actually have lots of comments that are coming in and folks that are saying they agree with what Amanda had shared. And it's more of a statement, but I'd really like to get your insight into what Amanda is saying and just what your thoughts are on this and if you have any suggestions for her. So Amanda says, as a team of one with little support from executives, it's not just proving the impact of learning initiatives, it's also justifying my role. What are your thoughts on there and any advice that you'd give?
From my perspective, sometimes it can become overwhelming, right? To figure out where do I start and how do I make sure that my role is justified within the organization. I think sometimes you can start, I would suggest starting small. So Matthew mentioned this earlier, right? So find one small thing. So again, is there something that the business is focusing on that they're trying to solve for? So let's say it's customer retention. So as an organization, you're trying to retain more customers, and maybe that KPI has gone down slightly. So that gives you, Amanda, as a team of one, an opportunity to go in and look at it and say, hey, is there something maybe from a skill development standpoint within those customer service representatives that we could address and we could upskill? So it might be how they're handling the calls. It could be maybe they need to understand how to de-escalate if the call gets a little more heated, right? So if they can better talk the customer down and make them feel like they've solved a problem, that could impact KPI. So it doesn't have to be this ginormous thing that impacts every department within the organization. It's just finding one business issue, that one KPI, and attacking it with an L&D solution. So you'd assume if you train and find how to upskill those agents, your customer retention rates are going to go up.
Mm-hmm. I'd echo very strongly what Anne was saying there. I think, in my career, I've heard this so many times. L&D is a cost center. It's not a profit center. What do you really do? You just organize courses and all of those types of things. So, which, we could spend hours, talking about. But I think Anne's absolutely right. And what I was going to add to the comment was, what's the one challenge? Well, what's the one thing? What's keeping the execs up at night? What's really troubling them? And how could L&D or skills or whatever it is, how could that support getting better? Because I think particularly in a small organization with a small HR team, maybe a HR team of one or slightly more, you're kind of, it's compliance training, got to get the compliance training out there. And yes, that's important for legal reasons, but how are you affecting the business? And so to Anne's point, she gave a great example there with the call agents. But just finding that one thing that will turn the dial for the organization, that's the way to justify your role.
That's super helpful. Thank you for sharing that. And you both kind of alluded to this and answered this, but just for those listening, or maybe for those that came in late, as we close out and about to be entering into our Q&A, I'd love to hear from you both. If someone just took one step after this session to make L&D a bigger lever for retention and growth, what should it be?
Maybe I could go first. I don't want to repeat what I've just said, but in terms of a real action, is tomorrow or the next day, sit down with one of your execs and find out what are their challenges. What are the things that are stopping the organization, the people things that are stopping the organization moving forward? That book a call, find them. If they're having a drink by the water cooler, go and stand by them and don't let them leave. Whatever it is, buy them a cup of coffee. But have a conversation. Start having that more direct conversation with them, so you're being more proactive rather than reactive. And the old adage of HR, and particularly learning and development, being seen as the order taker. Don't be order taker anymore. Actually step in and lean into those conversations with execs. So get that meeting on your schedule. That's my perspective.
And I'll jump in and just add one more thing. I think that's also important. Is making sure you've got data, right? To support your ask. So what Matthew mentioned is hugely important. Like, find, if there's hopefully someone on the team, right, that's an ally and someone you can go to and kind of have your back, but understand, what are the challenges within the organization, and then pair that with the data. So I had mentioned the engagement survey, right? And then getting more detailed data with that. Like, engagement levels, again, are one data point, but it's also critical, right? If you can say, hey, here's where we're lacking, you can tie back to, again, that labor market. Like, it's painful when you lose somebody, right? To go back and backfill, it impacts the organization, it impacts productivity, right? Because they don't step in and have the same level of productivity as someone else. They can impact the team morale. The manager spends more time training, right? So find what's important to the organization and then bring the data forward that says, hey, if we solve for this, here's where this will help us. We can save on, the time with our retention rates. We don't have to hire as many people, right? There's all these studies that show engaged employees are far more productive, right? They give that discretionary effort. So I think it's important to have your ducks in a row and have data from multiple angles when you go and ask for L&D. That's
a great point.
Thank you both so much for your insight. So many great takeaways already. Now we do have some minutes left, so I'd love to take some questions from the audience. And if you're not sure what to ask, think about your biggest L&D challenge right now. Anne has over nearly 30 years, I think we had talked about before, of HR experience. What was that?
I said 20 years makes me feel younger.
20. We'll say 20.
It is
30. So what's your standing between your HR team and stronger development? If you're having trouble, thinking about a question, share what that would be. Now, we did have a few questions that were sent to us prior. One was, what advice do you have for HR leaders who want to build a business case for investing in learning, especially when the budget is tight or leadership isn't fully bought in yet?
I feel like I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I think it's so important, right? I think Matthew and I both kind of had this very similar theme, is making sure that you've got the facts and you've got the data. And again, think small. Like I didn't go and ask for $100,000. Like I didn't have this big program, right? I just thought, okay, I got the data. I picked like 3 to 4 things that I felt like we could solve through getting the learning management system. And I went with that ask, so I think that's a mistake sometimes people make, is they think if I'm going to go and ask for something, I have to have this huge system, right? And it's going to be really expensive, and, both large and smaller organizations. But I know for my organization, there's no way I would have gotten that amount of money, and we didn't need it, quite frankly, right? So if you do the needs analysis and figure out how do you get the most bang for your buck, use the system or use the leadership development program and get really creative, right? Matthew talked about that. How do you continue to reinforce training after it's happened? It doesn't mean you have to keep paying a facilitator nonstop. So I think that's a key thing, is you just get creative and don't start small, right? You can have large impact with smaller amounts of budget.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And another question that we had come in was, how do you measure the success of a leadership development program beyond just attendance or course completion? So you talked about this a little bit, but anything else you would add or emphasize here about measuring the success of a leadership development program?
This is a great one, and this is one I think I've been asked on every single webinar I've done about this one. I'm sure ChatGPT's got a great answer for this, but in my experience, you can only measure what you've set up in the first place. So it very much links to what we've been talking about here. So if there's a particular KPI, whether it's around retention, whether it's the NPS or whatever it might be, revenue, if you're working with sales people, for example, it's got to be a real issue. It's got to be a real problem that you're trying to solve. And if therefore your objectives up front should be linked to whatever those KPIs are. So a lot of companies do get very fixated on how many people have attended, but they could have attended and not learned anything. So what's the point? So you've got your initial reaction to the way it was delivered. Are they in a better place than when they started? Right, you can get that reactionary thing, but then you can follow up. So maybe you've instigated a 360 process. So you've got a before and after, if it's a leadership program, because who better to ask if a leader has improved than the people that they lead? And if the organization's got values and management expectations or competencies, you can map those across to that as well. But you need to show that there has been some progress, rather than we've had 100% completion rate. So what? Who's learned anything? Nobody. Was it of value then? Yeah. So being very clear up front what you're trying to do gives you the opportunity to measure it after the learning.
Thank you for that. And earlier, Lita, forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, had shared that sometimes support, they have support, but it's the buy-in from leadership that's hard. And you had touched on this, but I just wanted to see if you had anything else to share or add for Lita.
One of the things I've done in the past is actually had leadership play a part in the leadership program. So if as a company, if we need to be on an upward trajectory, we need good leaders. Therefore, as a leader, you should be supporting those people you want to be better leaders, if that makes any sense. So if I can say, kind of put your money where your mouth is, in terms of, how can you play an active part in this? So rather than just be a reactive signing it off, how can you as a leadership group, as a leader, play your part in forming the leaders, over the next year, 18 months? So that's something I've seen. But going back to what Anne has been talking about really well, is around the data points. Leaders love data. They like to see numbers go up. So therefore, if you can show that you're focusing on a real problem and the KPI will go up or be successful, then that's a great way to get buy-in from a leadership team. But get them involved. Ask them what they think. What do they want? What do they imagine? Like get your leaders thinking.
Absolutely. And Amanda, iterate, like that's perfect. You'll have them participate in the actual program.
Yeah.
So
they will have years of experience of things that have gone well, things that have gone badly. Get that out of their heads and share that with other people.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. Again, this has been an amazing session packed with so much great advice. Again, if you join live, don't forget to enter to win the 5 seats into our leadership program. We'll be announcing the winner on our LinkedIn page later today and contacting the winner by email, so look out for that. And if you're ready to turn learning into a revenue driver for your business, we at FIG would love to chat. Thanks again for joining Build, Train, Retain, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.